Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our August AI/ML seminar series. I am happy to welcome Walt Alvarado, a biophysicist from the Space Sciences Research Branch at NASA Ames Research Center. Walt did his bachelor's and master's actually here in California in physics at Cal State Long Beach, and then moved to the University of Chicago to complete his PhD in biophysics. And today, Walt will be discussing a generative AI-based tool to help scientists standardize their data. And this tool is also integrated into NASA's Open Science Data Repository. So with that, Walt, please share your screen and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. Let's see here. I think there we go. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to share some of the work that we've been doing. I guess a lot of the work I do here is in the Space Biosciences branch here at NASA Ames. I also serve as the AI scientist for the Open Science Data Repository and the National Biological Institutional and Scientific Collection, or NBIS for short. And I'm the co-lead for the AI for Life in Space group. And part of our scope of work is developing AI machine learning models to help support different types of space biology projects. And one of those projects is how can we leverage AI to help us curate scientific data? Just to give you a little bit more background on some of the research that we do here in space biology, a lot of it is studying how space really impacts living systems. And that's through either space-flown experiments that look at cell cultures, rodents, and plants, as well as ground simulations and analogs like particle accelerators and centrifuges. And really the idea is how does spaceflight risk like microgravity and radiation affect living organisms in space? Um, as you can imagine, we've been doing this for several decades, and so that's generated a massive amounts of data that requires curation and accessibility to the rest of the scientific community. And so when these experiments get conducted, all that data gets uploaded into the NASA Open Science Data Repository, or OSDR for short. We have a tool kit where users who or PIs that have done these types of experiments can go on, use the portal, upload their data sets, and they work with a curation team to make that data what we call fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Depending on the types of data sets that are generated, it will fall within these three sub-projects. If it's physiological, imaging, telemetry data, that falls under the purview of ALSDA. Omics data falls under GeneLab, and the actual biospecimens from those experiments are also made accessible through the NBIS program. So it's not every day you get to go to space and do biology experiments, and so those tissues are very rare, and we like to sort of make those accessible to the rest of the scientific community. And so you can go and actually request those samples so you can kind of do your types of experiments on those tissues as well. Over the years, we've amassed massive amounts of data across 500 different studies, generated over 1,000 data sets across 45 different species, looking at 80 different assays, and it's generated almost 160 terabytes of data sets. And so it's a massive amount of data that requires pretty much significant curation and coordination to get that standardized in a way that's accessible to everybody who wants to use it. So as the amount of data grows, we run into some of the same challenges that other people in our field face. Data silos is a big one. So our data can live in different types of servers. That makes it very difficult to share across different organizations or platforms. Some of these experiments are very complicated and require the input of the actual PI to understand how the design of the experiments were set up, what some of these ontologies mean, and so that makes it very difficult to standardize. Something I'm very guilty of is redundancy, generating multiple copies of your data sets because you don't want to lose it, and so that kind of really balloons the amount of data that we generate. And things like incompatibility, different formats don't work really well with other types of systems. And so how do we kind of transform them in a way that we sort of still preserve the information that we need? And so the way that we like to think of it is through something called the ETL framework. So we have data sets that we have that are standardized or not standardized, right? We get all this data from these experiments, tables, images, papers, and we would like to do is extract the information that we need, transform it, and then upload it onto an actual data repository. And the question is, can we leverage a lot of these like generative AI tools to help us sort of speed up that process? Um, and so really the holy grail is I give it a bunch of data, tables, images, whatever, and I get something that you see here on the right-hand side that I can then upload onto on the actual repository that extracts the information that I need. It's 100% accurate because it's scientific data. And so the question is, how do we do that, and how do we build these types of tools? Um, it's not easy to do, but what really inspired this was aligning data sets that were generated through these experiments with the ontologies that we've already set and are the ones that we follow. So last year, we had several interns kind of built these smaller tools to help us align our data sets and verify the information is correct. So here, for example, on the left-hand side, we have a column that has the ontologies that we use for our data repository. And then on the second column are the matches that it found within all these different tables. Usually you can handle these types of matches using programmatic methods like leverage time distance. You can ask how similar are these two strings, and if it's just a few characters that are misplaced or misspelled, you can assign it a score, and you can say like, well, if it's anything above 90%, 80%, we are pretty confident that it's the same word. The problem happens, though, is that if a PI or somebody doing these experiments uses something that's semantically similar, but it's not necessarily the same word, and things like leverage time distance sort of fail at making those matches. And so over the summer, we had interns use and develop these tools around using AI to help find these semantic matches. So for whatever score threshold you set, anything below that, a large language model would then look at the list of ontologies, find the best one, see what was inside the actual documentation, extract the information that it needed, and then sort of align the data that way and verify that it was correct. Um, Behind all this is using schemas to sort of orient the large language model to output the data in such a way that it aligns with what you expect it to see. So, for example, if you were looking at maybe um, some solution that required a certain level of metadata, you can impose that schema on the output of the large language model. And then you can say, well, if it doesn't follow the schema, ignore it, move on, try again, whatever you're developing the tool to do. And these serve as validation checks to make sure that the semantic matches meet whatever required standards we're setting. And so um, and so we, had interns kind of built these smaller tools, these graphical user interfaces where they can upload a file, select a file from some sort of intake form that already has predefined ontologies, and then with a click of a button, match them, export them, and then we can use those exported files to update our data repository so users can find the data sets and the experiments. But as the summer progressed, we started noticing that we were building all these different types of AI tools that were doing all these different types of tasks, like segmenting tables from Excel sheets, tagging data sets with new metadata fields to make sure that the data was AI ready for training, generating graphical abstracts based on the information and documents that we had, generating summaries of images that we had in our repository that didn't have any types of descriptions, augmenting our previous payloads to get better insights as to what we had in our repository, and of course chatbots to be able to ask questions about what we had in our repository and pointing us to the directions of other types of data sets that we might be interested in looking at. And so really that really inspired us to sort of kind of consolidate all these different tools and build essentially a platform that sort of takes everything here and makes it pretty streamlined. And that's what we call the AI curation tool, or AI Cure for short. I'll go over the interface. Everything's pretty modular. And so right now it's built for the Open Science Data Repository, but it's coded in such a way that it makes it very generalizable to other types of disciplines and fields, because a lot of the routes are the same. And if you already have ontologies that you're comfortable using, those are pretty easy to upload and then use that to sort of standardize your data set to that reference. What powers this toolkit is something called retrieval-augmented generation. And so the idea is that we have these different files that are either structured or unstructured. And what you do is you start chopping them up into little pieces. And you say, okay, I have this file, maybe this document, I'm going to chop it into a certain number of chunks. And these chunks are they're going to turn into vectors or tokens. And I'm going to store those tokens into something I called a vector database. And within that vector database, it has all the information of all the files you've uploaded, summaries of images, documentation, tables, you name it. And so when you're interfacing with the large language model and you're prompting it to do a certain task, that prompt will also turn into a vector. And then you could do things like cosine similarity to say, well, hey, is there anything in my vector database that sort of sounds similar to this thing? If there is, and it passes a certain threshold, you can actually retrieve those documents or those chunks and then use that as context that the large language model can then see and say, oh, okay, I think I have an idea of what you're asking. And that's to limit the hallucinations and to ensure that it can answer the question or the task that you're assigning it to do. And really everything's built around this retrieval-augmented generation, which you can then kind of like combine with other types of machine learning algorithms to do more advanced things. So we'll talk about in a second. And so one of the things that we upload onto our open science data repository are, PDFs of studies, documentations, Excel sheets, tables, PNG images. And so really the first step was, can we just take all these general types and create a vector store for these for these types of files? And then we're also working on actually using that sort of same pipeline to work with scientific formats like FASTQ files that have sequence information, and then have some preliminary analysis, and then use that as part of what gets fed into the vector store. And so as you're uploading these documents in the backend, it's parsing everything, it's standardizing it for content, and getting it ready for whatever downstream analysis you're going to do later on. And so everything gets split into these smaller chunks. And so that's really what helps improve the search and the retrieval part of the actual curation tool. And the idea is to be able to do this with all different types of formats, images, movies, documentation, PowerPoint, and just create a vector database for these collections or for these types of files. The way the curation works for open science the data or for OSDR is that our curators will take a set of files and then sort of parse through it and then use that information to create these study sheets that are then posted onto the actual repository. And so the idea is, well, can we create payloads or can we create vector databases that correspond to these payloads? And so we call those vector databases collections. You can create as many collections as you like, 1, 2, 100 files. And as long as you upload it, there's a route for it. And that becomes it becomes a container. And so everything that the large language model is going to use as reference is within that container. And then at any point during the curation process, you can swap them out without having to start over again. What's so great about it is that you can actually not only remove or add files to your collection, but then you can also use keywords to sort of narrow down the search space so that the AI model only looks for the particular files that you're interested in looking for. We try to make it as seamless as possible by just being able to just generate as many as you like. And so that is kind of what gets interfaced with all the other module tools that we have in our system. And that really helps us make sure that we have a clear logical separation between different tasks and different projects. The other great thing about it too is that you can download these vector databases and give it to another curator or to somebody else. So it's essentially downloading everything that the chatbot knows about this particular project, putting it in a file, and then putting it somewhere in some other tool or giving it to another curator that can take over that curation, the pipeline. We also sort of added a few things like like insights about each particular file. So as you're actually uploading these files in the backend, these summaries are being generated automatically. So you upload a PDF file, and as it's being uploaded in the backend, there's an AI model already kind of summarizing everything about that document. It's already extracting keywords about that particular document, and it also generates a standardized output of that document. So we keep these documents, these tables, as downloadable assets on our actual repository. And so those assets require certain metadata. And so as you're uploading, it's generating these metadata fields based on whatever keywords you'd like it to generate. So for our particular purposes, if we upload a PDF and it's an actual study, we'd want title, the ID, the DOI, submission date. and it extracts that information to the best of its abilities. And then that's the file that we use to update whatever study pages or update the metadata for that particular file type. And all that's done automatically. And it does it for any types of files that you might upload to the actual system. Um, like any other AI tool, we also have a conversational chatbot that can access these collections. So you upload a collection, and then the chatbot has the ability to answer questions about these particular documents or this that particular collection. Um, all this lives locally, so none of it goes to any other proprietary AI model. We have the capabilities, users have the capabilities to swap out different models depending on whatever task they'd like. So if, for example, you're uploading nothing but images and you want to use an image model, you can swap it out on the fly. Everything is kept on premise, so none of the content actually leaves the environment. As you're conversating with it, it's also keeping tag of all the conversational history. So you can swap it out, come back to it, and still remembers everything that you've done throughout the curation process. And it works seamlessly with any other type of collections. As long as you upload it and you ingest it and you activate it, the chatbot can sort of start acting, referencing it for whatever task you'd like. Now, on top of all that, the next thing that we wanted to do is to ensure that whatever analysis scripts curators were already using to standardize their data sets, that the AI model also would have those access to those toolkits. And it was around that time that Model Context Protocol came out, or MCP for short. The idea of an MCP is essentially it's like a USB-C for your AI model. So your AI model has access to whatever tools you'd like it to give access to. So you can give your AI model access to web APIs, to your Slack, databases, Python scripts. And if you're feeling brave, you can give your AI model access to your local file system. And depending on whatever agents or whatever task you're assigning the AI model to do, it can reference the right tool and call it, and you can put validation checks to make sure that it's actually executing what you want it to execute. And what that helps is that it allows the curators to sort of stay within the same toolkit and run those types of analysis on the data sets that they're working on without having to go and open up a terminal and run these analysis scripts to get the information that they need. The way it works, you have your chatbot, maybe you want the chatbot to have access to the Open Science Data Repository API. So you activate the toolkit, then you can start asking it questions about what's already on the repository. So you can say like, hey, tell me a little bit more about what OSD 488 is all about. And so in the back end, we have different agents that are doing different things. So for this particular case, we'd only need one agent, and this agent is the API agent. So now the AI model has access to the API. It can make the necessary call and extract the information that you're requesting. So here kind of gives you a big summary of everything about this particular study, OSD 48. But then you can get more advanced with it. You can say like, hey, I also want to look and generate a plot of the top 10 expressed genes for OSD 120. And so that's a little more complicated and requires more agents, but the idea is the same. You upload your scripts, you upload your analysis scripts, and the AI model will know how to sort of call it and use it. And so here you have you have your study 120, it finds the top 10 expressed genes, it generates a plot, and then that plot can then be used throughout this whole curation process if you'd like it to. And so really the idea is whatever scripts you have, whatever analysis toolkits you like to give the model access to, the model can do that all in this virtual environment where it's all separate from anybody or any other user. So it's sandbox, everything's safe within that particular sandbox. And then after certain hours, everything gets erased. So nothing stays locally. We also make the tool available to the rest of the scientific community. So if if you want to run this on your local servers or on your computer, you can actually use the code, download it, and then sort of, modify it whichever way you'd like. Everything is open source, open access. So we try to make that accessible to everybody. And then finally, this is kind of like one of our study pages looks like, and this is kind of what we're aiming for. This is the information that we want to generate from all those documents that we have from these experiments, essentially a study page. We follow something called the ESA tab format. ESA stands for the Investigation Study Assay Format files. Those are types of files that provide either a high-level overview of the experiment and how it's designed, a study file that tells you about the subjects and the experimental factors, assays, what kind of protocols we use, and any sort of raw data and where those raw data live. And so that's the page that we're trying to generate. And so that using that as sort of the template, over the years, our curators have developed these configuration files. So depending on the type of study or depending on the type of assay, they've already figured out, all right, these are the features that we want to extract from these studies. And so that's really helpful because then when we do enable the MCP to go and fill in some of this information, it can reference those configuration files to essentially generate descriptions or any other types of metadata fields you want to fill in. And so we call this our magic wand feature. So, for example, we want a description of this particular payload. So with a single click of a button, it will generate a description based on all the file types you've given it. And if you have maybe assays that you want to fill in, they'll look in the documentation, find the assays, and then upload and sort of get the template ready for you to start filling in with the information that it requires, like sample names, proteins, the imaging method. And so that's all done in the back end. And the idea is not to have the AI model fill everything in for you. It's to have the AI model sort of speed up the process of filling things in, but still keep the curator in the loop. I'm not very confident at giving scientific data to an AI model and having it fill everything in for me. I'm more confident with a curator taking a look and ensuring that everything the AI model is coming up with is something that is in the actual data that we're giving and feeding the AI model. But really, it's to minimize a lot of the repetitive entry tasks that curators have to go through, and so they can focus less on formatting and more on the actual science. But it ensures that all the metadata flows pretty seamlessly and really cuts down on the amount of time required, and it keeps everything within this particular toolkit, so you don't have to kind of move around, jump around your operating system, or call these other tools that are living in different folders. Essentially, everything lives within this particular toolkit. And yeah, so I mean, like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of the big toolkit. A lot of it is using and leveraging these AI models, machine learning algorithms, and building around that. Right now, it can handle a lot of the general data sets like Word, Excel, and some scientific formats. And then really is making it easier for people to just integrate their own pipelines into the actual toolkit. So whatever process you're working with, the AI model can sort of take over and sort of help with that and reduce the amount of time it takes to, curate some of these file types. We do have working groups comprised of like subject matter experts and citizen scientists that kind of work together and collaborate on some of these tools and standards. If you're interested in joining, here's the website. You can feel free, jump in, sign up to one of the working groups and kind of see what we're doing. And if you're interested in working with the tool, this is the link here. Feel free to use it. You have to be behind the NASA VPN to access it for now. But once it leaves beta, the hope is that anybody can use it. And if you don't want to use it through our servers, feel free to I forgot to put the link here, but we actually have a GitHub for it. So you can download it, modify it any way you like. It's all open source. So, but yeah, I mean, all this is work done by the curation team and as well as people from the OSDR branch. It's been years, and a lot of these pipelines have already been developed many years ago. And now it's just essentially giving the AI models ability to call some of these pipelines that have been developed by very skilled people. So, but yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions or.
Awesome. Thank you, Walt. This is very helpful. So you can still raise your hand or posting your questions in the chat. And it looks like we have one where Caleb, go for it.
Hi, thanks. Great talk, Walt. Really fascinating, impressive work. So let me ask a bit of a devil's advocate question. And you sort of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask about whether and how you monitor or measure accuracy. So for instance, after a text prompt and one of your chat interfaces, you know, how do you assess the validity of what's returned and what then happens? Is there a mechanism for that, or is it really that the human has to be in the loop all the way through?
There are different locations throughout the pipeline where we do put like checks to ensure that everything is in order. So, for example, um, like during the data alignment process, if we want the AI model to fill in, for example, I don't know, what not voltage, because that's maybe like what chemical group was used or whatever. Um, Something where there's an ontology for it. You can sort of impose a schema on the output of that large language model, and then if it doesn't follow whatever ontologies are there, it won't go through. Um, there are plans to add like things where you can see that it was AI generated. So if somebody doesn't feel comfortable, they can see like who generated this. Was this manually generated or was this AI generated? But that's one way of making sure that it's not just hallucinating things that we don't want it to hallucinate. As far as like when you interface with the chatbot, the MCP, if you are using an MCP tool in the backend, you can't develop sort of validation steps so that if it's not what you want, it won't go through. But then if it does go through and maybe it pulled the wrong documentation, I think it's at the discretion of the curator to ensure that it's correct. And so there are places where there's validations and there's places where there's definitely work to be done, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Hey, thanks so much.
So it looks like Jan was asking about the GitHub link because of the
Oh,
NASA VPN, and this actually kind of played into a question that I'm going to hop in and actually ask the question here because related to this, I'm wondering. So you said this is in beta. So that means then that none of this is yet incorporated into like the Rose's like grant requirements or anything. Do you have a sense if that is something that where this may be headed once you're out of beta? Because I could see this as being something that the Rose's programs may want, could be
yeah.
part of one of the what is it? I always forget the um of one of the files that are required with, versus was it the OSDMP? I'm probably saying it wrong.
No, it's no, so the project was initially funded through the OCIO office. And so
Okay.
so we got funding for 1 year to essentially develop a prototype that um that had these three different functionalities, like being able to, leverage a large language model, curate the data, and then ingest as much data as it possibly can and create the summaries for these things. Because the idea is to be able to adapt it to other types of divisions and other types of disciplines. But the goal is to sort of continue moving it forward through the roses. And
Okay.
we definitely have had like conversations with like Earth Science and the science, what is it, the Science Discovery Engine, um, that host a bunch of these data sets from all these different divisions. And those
Hmm.
pages require a level of curation. And so this kind of is like the back end steps to get those pages up and running, so that the discovery engine can find the necessary information for users.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, let's take another Shirshak Saha. I see you have your hand raised. Go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hello. I want to ask something that how can augmented generation rack system can be modified to handle complex queries requiring multi-hop reasoning, and what retrieval strategies would be the most effective in such scenarios?
So right now we're experimenting with knowledge graphs. So Charlotte, who's on our team, is developed this tool called Spoke that allows you to sort of develop knowledge graphs based on different types of similarity metrics. And so the idea is to be able to, along with RAG, apply a knowledge graph beforehand so that the chunks have some sort of connection to all the other chunks. So if you were to pull this particular chunk, you can see the level of connections with all the other chunks that might be in a different file, and use that as context for the AI model to be able to fill in the gaps. So that's the next step in the process for the collections, is to just have like a little switch where you can say, like, do you like to use a knowledge graph? How deep do you want this knowledge graph to go? And then give the user the ability to fine tune these vector databases. There's a lot of ways you can format them to make them more efficient. You might want to sort of lower the number of tokens. You might want to use, whatever the settings you want to set. And so you'd like to give the user the ability to fine tune those so they can sort of get the curation tool to, work the way they'd like it to work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we have a handful of questions in the chat. I'll just read them all to you. So
Sure.
first, from Travis Ramirez, can and how well does it handle batch image data from Curiosity regarding image analysis?
So we built an actual tool for that. It's just not integrated yet. Right now, we have one of the use cases that we need. We have a lot of legacy data, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I'm gonna try. We have a lot of legacy data, scanned images of like these previous studies that aren't nowhere to be found. And so we built this little patch system where you say, all right, these are maybe 100, 1,000 images of these previous experiments that have no digital analog to them. It uses an agent to then extract the information and format it in Markdown. And then it uses another agent to sort of try to fill in the gaps that might have been missing based on, how well it extracted. That's one of the tools that the curators have asked for. It's just integrating in there. Right now, the way that we sort of measure how well it performs is by comparing it to other data text extractor tools like ocular recognition, OCR. So you do that first, you get a first shot at it. You say, all right, this is how well it did when I didn't use AI. Here's me using an actual agent. And then you compare those two, and then you say, all right, here's what it missed, here's what it didn't do well, here's a score. And then the curator can sort of go in there and fill in the rest to ensure that everything's correct. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, we have a question from Amanda also. Have you tried uploading a publication that has already been fully curated on OSDR to your tool and check to see if the output and data structure matches the manually created data set? If so, how close was it?
Yeah, so that's kind of how we test all the tools. So right now we're using OSD 488, which looked at circa at like expression levels in space. And so as we build these tools, we upload those files. We've worked with the curation team, and so they provided essentially the raw data files that the submitter submitted, plus the actual documentation of the published work. And so we use that, we upload it into the system, to the toolkit, we run these tools, and we see how well it does. For example, the assay tool here is based on that particular study. So I think this is, 488. So we take the files that we got from the curators, the raw files from here, and then we upload it here. We try to see how well it does. Did it get the description right? And then at the bottom, it has a couple of assays, which got some of them right. And then those are then matched to the configuration files that the curators have used. And so I think a few of them were, I think if you go down here at the bottom, you can kind of see it in action. So you click on it, Western blot, calcium uptake. And so those two were already there. And so I found those two. And the actual columns are based on whatever's in the config file anyways. So the next step here is to then have it be able to fill in the actual cells with the information based on those documents. So that's a little harder to do, but there's some ideas floating around, so we'll try to test them out and see how it performs. But that's kind of how we ensure that whatever tools we're building are aligned with whatever is already on the repository.
Okay, awesome. And Ryan Scott had just a clarifying question. Could you clarify that this is only for curating data which has an associated publication, correct?
Is this only for data that has publications? Um, no, I think it's for really try to make it as general as we can. So we do, for now, we're using some of these published works, but the idea is to be able to just dump everything to the system and then try to extract the information that you need so you can then load it to whatever repository or curate it in whatever format you like.
Okay, and then we just had a request to just touch on the retrieval augmented generation one more time. I think somebody just wanted to better understand that a little bit more.
Yeah. Um, so when you upload these documents in the back end, you have, you know, you can have unstructured data, structured data, you can have images. Um, it doesn't really matter. You have these file types, and what you do is you start taking chunks from them. You say, all right, maybe I'm going to take a couple of paragraphs from this document. So if you're looking at at an essay, why don't you take like the first paragraph, then you'll take the second paragraph. Sometimes you want there to be a little bit of overlap, just so you know where the paragraphs end. But essentially, you're just chopping it up into little pieces. You then take those, you take that text, and then you turn it into a vector. You tokenize it. So you say, oh, okay, now these words are vectors. And so these vectors are then stored in a database, or a vector database is what we call them. And those are what we call embeddings. And so when you're interacting with the large language model, you're asking it questions and you're saying, maybe you're asking it something like, tell me any studies that looked at circa. So you have that keyword circa in there. So it'll take that prompt, it'll turn it into a vector, and then it'll go and search your vector database for vectors that are kind of pointing in the same direction. So if circa is one of those keywords and you have chunks in your vector database that have the word circa in it, they're more likely to be pointing in the same direction. So they're going to have some sort of similarity to them. And you can use something like cosine to say like, oh, how close are these two vectors pointing in the same direction? And you can set that threshold. So you can say, oh, maybe anything that's above 90%, whatever. Then if it matches that, it will then extract those vectors and then it will turn those vectors back into words. And so you've essentially extracted the chunk from the vector database using these vectors. And then in the backend, you sort of attach to your question the context. So now there's context at the bottom of the question that you asked the large language model. And the large language models will see your question. It will see the context that it extracted from the vector database. And now it can answer your question hopefully better with less hallucinations. Um, the problem with that though, and it's not a perfect system, is that if you were to upload documentations, maybe a document and it has all these references in the back, and in the back you have all these references for circa, those are also matches. And so there's clever ways of being able to only ingest the information that you need. And so for every file type, it has its own route. So documents like journal art entries will have its own special route where we only extract the introduction, the abstract, the method section, as opposed to just extracting everything else. Um, and so that's kind of how the RAG system works. And so now when the large language model sees the context, it can generate hopefully a pretty good answer based on that information.
Awesome, thanks, Walt. And we have a follow-up from Shurshak. What metrics and evaluation strategies are most suitable for assessing the performance of MCP in different AI applications such as knowledge retrieval or decision making?
So one thing you can do with these agents or these MCP agents, um, we have in the back end several agents that do several things. We have an orchestration agent. We have what we call a data analyst agent, a visualization agent. And essentially all these agents can either work in parallel or they can work in sequence, depending on the task you're asking it to do. And so part of that step can also include an agent that checks for validations. So if you have certain metrics that you require as it's performing these analysis, you can have an agent that either is at the end of the sequence for that particular pipeline or is run in parallel throughout this whole orchestration process. That's one way of being able to sort of validate and check whether the MCP agents are doing exactly what you wanted them to do. There's different ways of being able to sort of arrange them. And it really just depends on the workflow and the pipeline that you have in place. And so for us, some of these, so for example, for this particular case, we use a sequential orchestration layer. So we say, okay, well, first we need to extract the data. Okay, well, the next agent can't start until the API has been called. Once the API has been called, this agent can take over, get that information, feed it to the next agent, and so on and so forth. There are definitely situations where maybe you need to extract data from 4 or 5 different APIs. And so that can be done in parallel. And wherever in that workflow, you can add an agent that can check for validations and give you like a certain score depending on what your script is doing. So hopefully that made sense.
Okay. Okay, Shirshak said thank you. So it looks like it did.
Cool.
Okay, so are there any last questions? If not, we're going to start wrapping this up here. There's no more raised hands, and I think we hit everything in the chat. So if you do want, so this is has been recorded, and either later today or tomorrow I'll have it uploaded, and you can find it at our AI ML Seminar Series YouTube channel, which I've just posted in the chat. That has all the previous ones that we've done, along with some other primer videos that we've made over the years. And oh yeah, and Amanda said, I think folks are just waiting on a GitHub link.
There you go. Check. That's for the tool, and that's for the GitHub link.
Perfect. And I'll also paste that just in case it isn't accessible. I'll paste that in the description on once the video is uploaded, so people can access it there too. Okay. Well, this is awesome. Thanks again, Walt. I am looking forward to seeing where this goes once it gets out of beta. I do hope something like this eventually works its way soon into the ROSES program, because that would be, as far as standardization goes, that would be perfect.
Yeah, and anyone's allowed to push to the GitHub too. So like if you have any ideas or if you have a tool you like to, you can also become a contributor. So we really do believe in open science here. So whatever help you want to provide, we'd be more than happy to take it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, everyone, and keep your eye out for the next AI ML Seminar Series and your astrobiology email. Thanks, everyone. See y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks again,
Bye.
Walt.